We have been talking about this draft and the Panthers' strategy for weeks. Every week we have had an expert that covers the Panthers or covers the NFL come on and discuss what they think General Manager Dan Morgan is going to do. So we're going to hear from some of those people right now. We're going to start with this because the way this is set up the last few days is that Mason Graham, a defensive tackle from the University of Michigan, and Jalen Walker, the linebacker from Georgia, could both be available at 8. Now, for weeks, it seemed that either one of them or neither of them would be available at 8. And now it appears, based on some things, especially if the Jaguars go offense, especially if the Bears trade up to get Ashton Jeanty, that both of those guys could be available. So that presented, I guess, a good problem to have if you're Dan Morgan. Both of these guys considered, really high prospects. Which one do you go with? So we did ask yesterday that question to NBC Sports' Connor Rogers from our studio.
That would be my thought process. He's the one guy where if he really does fall to them at 8, and there's a lot of signs this week, and a lot of people think he will, it feels like it could alter what they thought they were doing the whole time, where it's, hey, we feel like Jalen Walker's going to be here. We feel good about the pick. We have a plan for him. Let's make the pick. And then it kind of goes into a situation where, well, we got additions on the defensive line and free agency, but this is somebody that could be a cornerstone for us for a really, really long time. He'll play with the power and the motor that we really like. He makes us a tougher football team up front. And now we feel like the strength of our team, we're making a strength of strength. We feel good about our interior, but now it's going to be a really good looking group. And the fact is, I think Mason Graham is a top 5 to 6 player in this draft, where Jalen Walker is a little bit more of a projection right outside my top 15. And I could see the Panthers looking at it that way too, where they go, we know exactly what we're getting with Graham, his presence. You watch how he could take over games, and he took over games that were really important games. And that means a lot as a prospect, whether it was the college football playoff in 2023, where they won the national title, and you look at his tape against Alabama, or you look at 2024 when they upset Ohio State. Him and Kenneth Grant, his teammate on the defensive line, they dominated that game, and they didn't allow Ohio State to do anything against them. So Mason Graham kind of rising to the occasion over and over again is something to me that will have teams be sold on what he's going to do as a pro.
All right, Dan Morgan gave us the phrase, if we get stuck at 8 last week. I think he tried to reel that back in a little bit, right? Yeah. Is there a scenario that you could see happening to the Panthers where they truly are in the war room being like, we're kind of stuck here, and what do they do at that point?
Well, I think they, obviously they're one of those two guys are going to be there. So I think they'd roll with that. And now, GMs and teams like to use stuck as a phrase because everybody would love to move out in this draft and get more picks because of the way the draft plateaus. There's just a lot of starting caliber players that are on a similar level, almost from pick 25 to 75. I really mean that. And it's sure the player that goes at 28 is probably going to have a better chance of being better than the player that goes at 72. But in terms of the raw ability and the projections, it's not that crazy where you'd rather have more cracks at it. You'd rather have more lotto tickets or swings or whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of why, and it probably was a little bit of a slip of the tongue calling it stuck because everybody's asking, what are they trading up for? I deal with this being in the New York area a lot with the Jets. You always have to ask yourself, what is the team coming up for? For the Jets and the Panthers, that would have to be a sliding Ashton Jeanty, and a team just wants to get in front of the Bears to have him. It could happen. It could very well happen, but there's no guarantees on draft night that great of a player slides. So I think that's kind of how they look at that spot, but those teams have contingency plans and players they feel really, really good about in those slots.
If the Panthers do trade back, how far do you think they'll want to go, and what could they get? And let's just stick with their biggest need, that's pass rush and edge.
They're actually in a little bit of a safer place because I think as long as you stay in front of the Bucks, or maybe you want to stay in front of the Bengals, you look at the Falcons at 15 and the Cardinals at 16. I think they're going to be looking at pass rushers, Mike Green from Marshall, Mykel Williams from Georgia, but you're still going to have an opportunity for a Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, a Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, maybe one of those guys in Green or Mykel Falls. And we're still talking about Jalen Walker. Like the Panthers might really like Jalen Walker. I find mixed opinions on him around the league, where it doesn't mean that Jalen Walker is necessarily going in the top 12. So they have a little bit more flexibility with what they need, can have them move back in a 9-ish spot range, and they could feel really good about that. I wouldn't go back to, 23 or beyond that, but I think they could flip back a couple of spots. Like, it's going to be interesting if Denver at 21 to come up for an Ashton Jeanty level player. Do you feel comfortable going back to pick 20 at Denver slot? I think you'd have to charge a pretty enormous price to feel good about that.
Rodgers, not just on Mason Graham over Jalen Walker, but also on a potential trade back for Carolina. All right, you've got questions, we've got answers. You can text us right now live, 704-329-3600. We're answering all of your Panthers draft questions. What is Carolina going to do with that 8th overall pick, one they perhaps mistakenly said they were stuck with, but we know that Dan Morgan, Dave Canales, Brant Tillis, everybody in that front office, and they told us they've gone through these scenarios time and time and time again to see anything that could possibly play out. Does one of these massive names, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, I doubt it. Do they fall back? I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, so Jalen Walker is such an interesting player when it comes to Carolina, because as we've kind of heard mentioned in bits and pieces here and there, he's considered a hybrid. Now, the Panthers have struggled recently with their defensive scheme to employ a hybrid successfully. And the example everybody points to is safety Jeremy Chin, a former second-round pick from the Matt Rule era when they went all defense in the draft that one year, who was a massive safety. I mean, the guy looked like he should have been a top 10 pick. The problem was that Carolina could not find a way to kind of squeeze him into either position. Was he an in the box safety? Somebody who plays closer to the line of scrimmage. He got 2 takeaways and touchdowns in one game at Minnesota, so you'd think that's how they would go. Then Ejiro Evero comes in. I remember watching him against the Steelers trying to cover Deontay Johnson, who put him in a washing machine, basically. Put him in a blender, and he couldn't cover him. Now, the Washington Commanders under Dan Quinn last year figured out how to use Jeremy Chin, leading a lot of people to wonder, could Carolina handle a hybrid? Dan Morgan last week, and it was really the only player he specifically spoke about, was Jalen Walker, and he was very direct. We would have him as an outside linebacker rather than an inside linebacker, and he played both at Georgia. Now, as an inside linebacker, I mean, that's, you need instincts, you need to read and react. He can, Connor Rogers did tell me he's not so sure about Jalen Walker's ability to read and react and use those instincts right away at the NFL level. What we do know he can do is go sideline to sideline. He might be undersized, but he's an athlete. So I think the Panthers' thinking is line him up closer to the line of scrimmage. Use your big guys up front, Derek and Bobby Brown and Tershawn Wharton, to create holes for Walker to explode to, blitz the quarterback, disrupt the run game, and just be that kind of guy wreaking havoc like he did in Athens all year long. But hybrid does scare some people. I did speak with Charlotte Observer Panthers beat writer Mike Kay, who's a brainiac with football, and this is what he told me about Jalen Walker and being a hybrid. Where are you kind of landing on Jalen Walker 2 weeks before this draft when it comes to Carolina?
Yes. Here's what I would say. Philosophically, I think taking a hybrid player that you're most likely going to use as a off-the-ball linebacker first 2 downs and a pass rusher on 3rd down is setting this kid up for failure. It's one thing to say he can do it. It's another thing to say that he can excel and then elevate in doing it. And I think you look at the guys that are all the rage right now. Frankie Louvu wasn't drafted. He also wasn't signed to be Frankie Louvu or what he's doing. By the way, he's played exponentially better in Washington than he did in this system a couple of years ago. Ejiro Evero didn't really show much interest in using Jeremy Chin, another hybrid linebacker safety sort of guy who had, a wide range. Nobody drafted Andrew Van Ginkel in the 5th round for him to be what he is right now, which is what a lot of people perceive Jalen Walker to be. And then you look at somebody like Zach Bond, who was used out of position for years. Like Isaiah Simmons and Xavier Collins, I mean, pretty much anybody Arizona drafted during the Steve Keim era on defense basically bombed out because they couldn't figure out how to use them. And I think you're behind the 8 ball if you're trying to get a guy to learn multiple positions because, there's a learning curve in the NFL. It doesn't matter if you're a really good kid or if you study really hard, but if you're being used all around the front, one, it's going to bite into the development of other people, but you're also going to have this, mishmash of a lineup. They need to get just great players or good players. And trust me, Jalen Walker is a very, very good player. I just don't know if they're at the point right now where you feel good about the defensive situation. Yes, you've retained Evero, But who's to say they don't do really well this year in spite of having Jalen Walker, right? And then he goes and gets a head coaching job. Or, more likely scenario, the defense doesn't work again, and then you're moving on from the defensive coordinator. What happens when the next defensive coordinator comes in and says, I want to put him here? So now you're a year behind the development, and it's just like, I don't know. Just philosophically, I wouldn't agree with drafting him to be a hybrid player. Now, if he's your number 2 edge on your board and you're going to use him as a full-time edge, by all means, go for it. Is he a great fit for that? He's very small. He's got pretty short limbs for an edge rusher. But Elvis Dumervil worked out, and he was 2 inches shorter. So, like, it's about trusting your coaching staff and having a plan. I also just think, like, sometimes being the smartest guy in the room typically makes you the guy with the dunce cap. And I just think, like, that's a guy that let somebody else miss or hit on. You know what I mean? Like, is it worth it when you are 5-12 was seen as a success last year in a few different ways because of how low the bar was? You have to win right now. And I know I'm rambling right now. I think Jalen Walker's a really good player. I think Ted McMillan's a really good player. If I were them, I would not love any of these guys. And I would pray for Mason Graham to fall. And I know they've drafted they've signed 2 really expensive defensive linemen. You can never have enough in the trenches, is my belief. I also think, like, there are better natural edge rushers than Jalen Walker. I think there are better fits for this offense than Ted McMillan. And so those are 2 guys that are getting a lot of discussion, and I get it. They're really, really good players, but I don't know if they fit the Panthers in this time and space. And while you want to say, hey, get the best player available, this team also needs to win. And win soon. I mean, I don't know how much longer David Tepper can preach patience here. And you held on to the assistant GM who you promoted to GM, and you've held on to this, and you've got this young, exciting head coach. Well, young and exciting gets old and boring when you lose. And so I think that's something they really need to understand.
What do you think the sweet spot is for a first-round trade? Where to go back to, what you can pick up asset-wise to add to your coffers already, and what type of player you would want to get there? Maybe some name, like, I know there's the cornerback out of Michigan. There's obviously Mykal Williams. Like, what range would you want to go back? Trade or Mike?
If it were me, I'd want to get to 17, and it would be the Bengals, and I would want to say, hey, look, things aren't working with you and Trey Hendrickson with this negotiation. Do you want to get the second or third best edge rusher? Trade up with us, give us your second-round pick, or give us a third-round pick and your first-round pick next year, or give us swap second-round picks with us and give us a third-round pick and then a third-round pick next year. Like, you've got to be creative here because teams don't naturally want to trade up, but, like, you have to find teams that might be begrudgingly stupid enough to do it. Now, speaking of stupid, the Dallas Cowboys and Miami Dolphins seem like absolute marks for trade-ups, especially because I think Will Campbell's going to go early in this top 10. And so then I think with them both needing offensive tackles and both of the GMs / owner being obsessed with running backs, I think Genty at 8 makes a ton of sense for a trade up for them. I don't think it'll be too expensive for their blood. If you can trade back there and swap second-round picks and get a third-round pick, you're better off on day 2. You've got 2 third-round picks and a better second-round pick, which is what they should be hoping for. I think that makes sense. And then once you get there, we're talking about, I can't pronounce the BC kid's pass rusher's name. He's probably my favorite. I'm going to call him Donovan EZ. Because I can't even pronounce his last name. I'm not even going to try. Joe Person will make fun of me, like he always does. But the Boston College pass rusher is my favorite edge rusher in this class outside of Abdul Carter. And I think sometimes it's okay to overdraft guys if you know that they are productive. I mean, he was an absolute force for BC.
Yep.
His testing numbers are great. He reminds me a lot of Cliff Averill. And then I brought him up with Golden. If you want to go offense, Golden would be my guy. And so I think if you can get one of those guys between that 12 to 17 range and you get an extra third-round pick and maybe a better second-round pick, you were, throwing a bar mitzvah party in between day 1 and day 2, I think, at Bank of America Stadium.
All right, Mike Kay from the Charlotte Observer. Very well thought out, nuanced, ideas about, is it smart to draft a player like Jalen Walker, or do you let somebody else figure out if he's kind of that boom rather than that bust? Again, had a live shot there of Jalen Walker's draft party at Country Club of Salisbury. We will absolutely bring you the images from there once he is picked, because he will be picked tonight. It's just a question of where and by which team. Could very well be the Carolina Panthers. So we're talking about, with Mike, sweet spots to make a trade. And again, here is the list of 9 picks that the Carolina Panthers do have tonight. Well, this is the pick history, number 8 overall. Again, Horn, McCaffrey, Gross, Biaka Batuka, who was a fantastic college player, and man, if he could have stayed healthy in the NFL, he could have been a great running back for the Carolina Panthers. But point is, you can still get a really good player at that 8th spot. It's not necessary. When Dan Morgan said, if we get stuck, I think, it was assuming that none of the defensive players they really like enough to draft at 8 will be there. But again, it seems like that could be the case if Walker and, again, Graham is available. So, talking more about Dan Morgan, and I did pose this question to Julian at the top of the hour when we started this. How big is this draft for him? I mean, he's in year 2 as the top guy, the head general manager. He was here under Scott Fitterer, the group that did bring in Bryce Young. So it's good for Dan Morgan that Bryce Young has turned it around. And now, and last year, Dan Morgan built out the offense. He invested into high-priced guards, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Obviously, they drafted a wide receiver, Xavier Legette. We'll see what happens with that. But up front, they invested on the offense. This year in free agency, they invested in the defense. They brought in Bobby Brown to pair with Derek Brown in the middle, a guy that eats up a lot of space and can help you stop the run and create gaps for players like Jalen Walker or current linebacker Trevin Wallace and others. And they've added to the edge with a pass rusher from Minnesota. They got Turk Wharton, kind of a dual threat, if you will, defensive tackle from Kansas City, who had 6.5 sacks last year. So clearly they built the offense out from the front back last year. They're trying to do the same this year. And this is going to be a big draft for Dan Morgan, and that is the question I did pose recently to Vashti Hurt. Vashti works for herself, basically, at CarolinaBlitz.com. She hustles all over the state and all over the area to cover all of our teams, the Carolina Panthers, Charlotte Hornets, Duke Blue Devils, North Carolina Tar Heels, and then some. One of the questions I asked her was, how big is this draft for Morgan?
Successful franchises hit in the draft, and you just don't hit on that first round pick. You have to hit in rounds 2. You have to find key contributors in round 3 and 4, and you maybe find a guy who is good in rounds 5 or 6. The Panthers have not done well in the draft, period. In recent years, they have done well in round 1, okay, but after that, it's been pretty much downhill. And even since Marty Herney, that's been the trend with Carolina. They'll hit in the first round.
Gettleman did too.
And Gettleman. You'll hit in the first round, and then it's just downhill after that. Dan Morgan has to change that. You cannot build a roster and only hit in the first round. And I think he knows that. And so this draft is very important for him. Last year's class was his first class. Like you said, it's still kind of up in the air how those guys will do. None of them necessarily came in and was like gangbusters and really allowed anyone who would defend Morgan to say, okay, he brought in this guy. It's draft-wise. And I mean, he hit in free agency with those signings on the offensive line. But draft-wise, he doesn't have a player that he can hang his hat on yet and say, look, I got this guy and I brought him in. He needs that. And whether he gets that this year, he needs that this year.
All right, good stuff from Vashti Hurt, as always, from CarolinaBlitz.com. She is on X at Keep Blitzin'. And our entire interview with her pre-draft, as well as Mike Kay and Connor Rogers and others, up right now on WCNC Plus and the WCNC Charlotte YouTube page. So, all right, here we are, Jeb. There's my guy, Jeb. He's doing everything over there. 5 minutes before the NFL draft begins. 5 minutes before the Tennessee Titans are on the clock at number 1. Really, obviously, Tennessee, much like Carolina 2 years ago, has been on the clock since the season ended. all signs point to the Titans drafting Cam Ward from Miami. I think the biggest surprise of the draft would be if that didn't happen at this point.
If it's not Cam Ward's name called in the next 10, 15 minutes, I will be shocked.
Now, one of the things, so we'll be watching right along with you as the 7 teams ahead of the Carolina Panthers make their selections.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting for folks watching, we don't necessarily want to play spoiler, but we actually have access to the fastest fibers, so we are watching the draft as close to in real time as humanly possible. So we will have live reaction the second it happens.
Yeah, and good to note there, because that's what's unique about this being on WCNC Plus and WFMY Plus live all over the state of North Carolina, is when that Panthers pick is made, the big analysts are going to talk about it for 5 minutes until the next pick is made.
Right.
We're going to talk about it all night here on WCNC Plus and WFMY Plus. So one of the things we'll be watching is are there offensive players taken ahead of Carolina
That's the big
that
question.
allows those top-line defensive players to leak back to number 8? One of the most interesting cases is Ashton Genty.
Where's he
Jeb,
gonna
you
go?
watch more college football than most people I know, except for Connor Rogers. Did you scout 320 individual
You know what?
players?
As much as I would love to one-up our buddy Connor, I think I was topped out about 175.
All right, so Ashton Genty, Boise State. This guy had a Heisman caliber season.
He was my Heisman Trophy.
Yeah,
It should have been him.
It absolutely had made the case. Didn't end up hoisting it because we had this generational talent in Travis Hunter. But Ashton Genty is so good that in a day and age where running backs become, kind of a dated commodity in the NFL, somebody you can get on a cheaper contract at a later round in the draft, he looks like a potential top 5 pick, whether it's by Jacksonville. But watch out for the Chicago Bears, because the Chicago Bears want to build around Caleb Williams, who showed flashes of being that franchise quarterback last year, but he needs more structure and support around him. The offensive line additions there will help. Receiver, we'll see how Rome Odunze progresses.
Right.
Running back Ashton Genty could provide, can you imagine that backfield?
You could literally just hand him the ball and that be it. He check downs, hand the ball.
It is so hard to tackle this guy. He's shifty. He's speedy. He is a bruiser at the same time, and then that would open up things for Caleb Williams. So if it's Chicago that moves up for Ashton Genty, what's already happening in Chicago is Walter Payton's name is being invoked.
I know.
And our Eugene Robinson, who is a Packers legend, and the draft is in Green Bay. He made it up there. He knows everybody.
Yeah,
right. So
hearing him talk
he's been
about
floating
his
around,
buddy
sending
Brett.
me back
crazy.
videos of here's Drew Brees, and we'll probably hear that later.
Yep.
Here's this guy. Here's that guy. Here's Abdul Carter. So one of the guys he heard from yesterday was Ashton Genty at the NFL's Play 60 event, cool event they do ahead of every draft, where they bring some of the players. Bryce Young happened to do it 2 years ago, and this is what Ashton Genty had to say about those Walter Payton comparisons.
Feels pretty good, to be compared to any great, but especially him, who's done so many great things for the game of football.
Would you rather run someone over or shake them?
I'll say run them over, because I think that just sets the tone. Everybody on the sideline, the team, they feel that energy, uplifts the team.
Like I said, not only is he a burner, Jeb, this guy can truck you, and I can't wait to see what he does